Welcome back to Meet the Authors with Dr. Philip Levin. Today's first guest on today's show is Johnnie Bernhard. Johnnie Bernhard has a long history of literary establishment. She was an English major. She has a career as a literary agent, and now she's gone into publishing her own book. She's here to talk about her first book, and we'd like to welcome Johnnie Bernhard to our show. Johnnie, hello.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you for having me on your debut program. Very pleased to be here.
I'm so glad. We're glad to have you. So tell us a little bit about your interest in writing. How did you get started?
Well, I think that reading and writing are entwined. I loved to read as a child. I read the Laura Ingalls Wilder series. I was crazy about Nancy Drew. I wrote very bad poetry in junior high and high school, kept a journal, went on to get a bachelor's in journalism and worked in newspaper, did some freelance for magazine, a lot of nonfiction work. But it wasn't until the last few years that I was no longer required to work a 40, 60-hour week that I began dabbling in fiction. And A Good Girl is my debut fiction novel. It's literary fiction / Southern.
It's a wonderful book. I really enjoyed that. And I enjoy reading those same type of books. When I was growing up, I was reading the Hardy Boys and got into all those type of literary things. So tell us a little bit, your journalism, what kind of journalism were you doing?
Well, I lived in Houston for a while. I had received my bachelor's at the University of Houston. I worked on the student newspaper there. I was in the yearbook. I worked for a newspaper in Southwest Houston called the Suburban Reporter that was working with all of those new neighborhoods west of Memorial. I went on to write for newspapers and magazines wherever we lived. I was very happy to follow my husband's career. He's a naval architect, so I've lived all over the Gulf Coast from Florida to Texas.
And that's how you ended up here, huh?
That is how I came to this area, which I love. It's a very comfortable place to live, and it's very rich in the arts. Once I decided to step up with fiction writing, I got in touch with you and the Gulf Coast Writers Association, which I think is very important for any writer that is serious to have the support of a writing group for not only critique, but also to learn about all the elements of writing, from editing to developmental editing to what makes great plot and how to write great dialogue.
That's so true. I mean, we really have to get with other authors and learn the techniques. Speaking of which, tell us about your book. How exciting to get your first book out into print. Who's published it? And tell us a little bit about the book itself.
A Good Girl is historical fiction / Southern fiction. It is the saga of a family for 6 generations. I've always been very curious about the immigrant stories of coming to America. So with this novel, I had the female coming from Ireland, leaving the potato famine of the 1840s and arriving on the Gulf Coast of Texas. Now, that is a true historical fact. That's how many of the Irish came to Texas. At the same time, the Germans were leaving Germany and coming to the Republic of Texas before it became part of the U.S. At that time, that republic was giving very large land grants, and it made it very affordable and appealing to immigrants to settle there.
So tell us a little bit, read us a little bit from the book. I've read some of that book. I really loved it. Was captivated by the realism about the coming alive issues of being part of the immigrant story. We really have enjoyed this book very much, and your professional writing just draws one in. So we have, give us about 40, 45 seconds and read us a little bit.
Thank you, I'd be happy to. This is from chapter 22, Faith, Hope, and Love. The November sky above the Gulf of Mexico was cast the same hue as the water below it. Gracie couldn't tell where the sky ended and the water began as she drove along the coastal road from Pass Christian to Biloxi. She slowed the car to 35 miles an hour, stunned by the palest of blues that washed the delineation line between land, water, and sky. The neap tide, just after the first quarter of the moon, erased the depths of high and low water along the shoreline. Perhaps it was the season's first cold front, creating the visual illusion of heaven and earth as one. She had left the house early that morning to interview a fisherman for the Biloxi Times. She met him at the Pass Christian Harbor at early dawn.
That is wonderful. Where can readers get a copy of this book?
Well, I'm very proud to say it is at St. Alphonsus Catholic Church Bookstore, Barnes & Noble, Poppy's on Washington Avenue, Pass Christian Books, Bay Books of St. Louis, the Mary C. O'Keefe Cultural Arts Center, and Triplet Day in downtown Gulfport, as well as Amazon. I'd really like to do a shout out to readers that are curious about the book to support our independent bookstores along the coast.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for coming with us, Johnnie. I'm so glad to have you as our guest.
Thank you, Philip.
All of the author's books are available through my website. Mississippi Gulf Coast and Neighboring Sites Anthology contains a collection of 25 essays about the history and tourist attractions across Mississippi's Gulf Coast. Features include the Round Island Lighthouse, Mary Mahoney's Old French House, Beauvoir, and the Friendship Oak. Read about the history of the Bellingrath Gardens and now defunct Size Place, where Elvis Presley and Hank Williams performed. Only $10 at www.doctorsdreams.com.